They raised you, cared for you, and supported you, and now the tables have turned. Your parents are aging. They need care and attention, and it's up to you to provide it. It's a common and often trying transition. All this week, WGBH News is focusing on the challenges of caring for elderly loved ones in a series we're calling You're Not Alone. Tonight, we're sharing cautionary tales about falling victim to financial traps. The elderly are particularly vulnerable to money trouble, especially when confronted with a barrage of mail-order offers, solicitor calls, and door-to-door salesmen. Jared Bowen introduces us to one Massachusetts woman who discovered her mother's spending habits long after they spiraled out of control.
After CRIS BRUEGGEMAN's father died suddenly 5 years ago, she noticed her then 79-year-old mother's mental acuity was slipping.
She was beginning to repeat things and not have the memory that she had had prior, which had been excellent.
Then what had been concerning became startling.
I received a phone call from her bank, and her banker asked me if I was aware that she had cashed in 6 CDs. And do I know why she would have done that? And of course I had no idea.
After flying back to the family home in Fort Wayne, Indiana, BRUEGGEMAN discovered her mother Doris as she'd never known her before.
She was not bathing. She was not cleaning the house. The refrigerator was full of food that was rotten.
And when BRUEGGEMAN, a nurse living on the North Shore, began investigating why her financially secure and otherwise frugal mother was cashing in her CDs, she made a host of discoveries. For starters, Doris was spending thousands of dollars on stuff she didn't need.
She purchased a Dell computer, a new set of pots and pans, some sets of dishes, and a myriad of other items. She subscribed to probably 10 magazines, People, Us, magazines that people in her age group don't generally subscribe to, Maxim, as an example.
BRUEGGEMAN says her mother received huge daily stacks of mail like this one, filled with mail order solicitations and sweepstakes notices.
She actually had a list of all the money that she thought that she had won. And this is it. There's 35 items on this list. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, $2,580,000.
Doris subscribed to 2 different cable companies, racking up nearly $3,000 in unnecessary charges. She spent another $3,000 on a mail-order vacuum cleaner and bought a security system from a door-to-door salesman. All purchases BRUEGGEMAN had to spend several hours a day for months on end undoing.
They, again, were sort of like, well, you know, you really should have, she shouldn't have gotten it if she wasn't going to use it, kind of thing, not very sympathetic.
Worst of all, though, BRUEGGEMAN believed a longtime acquaintance of her mother was taking advantage of her. At his urging, Doris had been writing sizable checks to cash. Then came the day BRUEGGEMAN learned from neighbors her mother had put her house up for sale.
Suddenly she started to talk about selling the house, and she's got to get it sold and get out of there. And she's been talking to some people that are in the business and people that are authorities on the subject and that sort of thing.
Eventually, with the help of doctors and attorneys, BRUEGGEMAN was able to stop the sale, take control of all of her mother's finances, and move her to an assisted living facility here in Massachusetts. Her mother, BRUEGGEMAN says, was both a victim of financial predators and her own loneliness.
The elderly are very vulnerable. They just are. They'll open the door to people just to have attention, somebody to sit down and talk with. And I think that was the scariest thing for me, that she was opening the door to people that were unsavory.
Today, BRUEGGEMAN says Doris's finances have been restored. And while her mother's dementia has progressed, so too has their relationship.
I saw her for a while during this process as kind of a project, as something that I had to take care of and just work, honestly. I saw her as work. And now that she's settled in and I've had a chance to step back and we're having a chance to go out and do things and shop and just kind of have some mother-daughter time, it's been really good for me. And that's what I want to take away from this, because I really hoped before she died that we would have that.
My first guest also watched a loved one lose the ability to make cogent financial decisions. Elizabeth GEHRMAN is a correspondent for the Boston Globe magazine. She recently relocated to Buffalo to help care for her ailing mother. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So your story was eerily similar. What happened to you?
Very similar. We had a joint bank account, And in January of 2010, I went to pay some bills, and I noticed it had a zero balance, and it should have had about $8,000 in it at that time. And it took me almost all day to get out of her what she had done with the money. And what eventually came out was that she had given $500 and $600 a time by Western Union to this nice Jamaican man who had promised her $450,000 if she only sent him, and she would send sometimes, $600 at 12 o'clock and $500 more at 2 o'clock in the same day. And, she just kept sending it until it was all gone.
Mm-hmm. And were you able, it was too late. You
it was too late for, not only for that, but these guys kept calling. Yes. They were relentless.
I'm familiar with this.
They got her routing number and her bank account number, which I was able to fix that one in time. But I mean, and then when I looked back, like the woman that you just profiled, she had also been sending money by mail to all these scam charities and sweepstakes and everything else. And they say, you've won, and just send us $35 here or there. And it added up to about $300,000 in the end. You
wonder what it is, because so many elderly people have done the same thing. They start writing those little checks, sometimes little ones, sometimes big ones. But what it is about getting older that makes them want to do that.
Right. Well, I think in my mother's case, I mean, we know now that she had dementia, but she was hiding it from me, and she was hiding that she had problems. She didn't want to bother me. I was her daughter who lived in Boston, and I was, she bragged about me all the time to people, but she never would want to tell anybody that anything was wrong. And when I went home, I would see that her calendar was full of social obligations, so I thought she was fine, but she would forget that she had gone out to brunch that morning, and by 2 o'clock she was lonely again. And so anybody who called, she wanted to talk to them.
So you didn't have power of attorney at that point?
I didn't then, but I do now. Yeah, right away. I got that right away. But and then it took me about a year to move to Buffalo, because I had obligations here in Boston. I have a house here, and I had to do things to the house to get it rentable and things like that. And so in that time, she still had access to the accounts, and she would go to the bank and tell them that I was stealing from her, and it was a mess.
It's a very common story. All right, well, in the course of our reporting for this series, it became clear to us just how prevalent financial trouble is for the elderly. Earlier this month, WGBH News reporter Gail Huff met Patricia Luppi, who says her father turned into an easy target for solicitors.
Patricia Luppi's father moved in with her when her mother died of lung cancer. Seen here in a picture with John F. Kennedy, William Keenan was active in Dorchester politics. He stayed active in his community and his church while living with his daughter.
What was the most stressful thing for you?
Watching him get old and watching him fail. That was the most stressful.
Working full-time, it was often difficult for her to keep him occupied at the house all day. Patricia worried about the phone calls he'd get from solicitors.
There were groups I've never even heard of, so it came from everywhere. They are lonely, and they need somebody to talk to, and you have to watch their checkbooks. You do. There is no and if or but about it. You have to be aware of what's going on there. And I've talked to several of my friends the same thing. And it might be $10 here, then it goes to $50, then it goes to $100.
She felt it wasn't her place to tell him not to donate his money, but she worried about him getting taken advantage of.
You're still their child, and they are the parent. And that was probably the hardest thing to do, because you don't feel that way after a while. So really it is preserving their dignity.
A devout Catholic, his life centered around the church in his latter years. This past February, he died at the age of 92.
I look what they did for us. I mean, he's World War II. He's a Purple Heart. That's hard. What I did wasn't hard.
You still miss him?
I do.
All right, so how can you protect your loved ones from these financial pitfalls? I'm joined now by Stephen Cohen, a leading elder attorney who helps families with asset protection and estate planning, and along with Boston Globe correspondent Elizabeth GEHRMAN is still here. Well, Steve, how do you kind of dial this back once it's already happened? I mean, I've heard many stories very similar to Elizabeth, where they've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is it, number one, are you ever able to recoup that?
You know, Emily, it's often really difficult. Once the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, and the money's gone, it's really tough. I mean, when Elizabeth was just talking about someone in Jamaica, you're not going to be able to get that money back. sometimes when you're dealing with real estate, if it's clear that the person had no idea what they were signing in terms of a sale, you might be able to unwind that transaction. But it's often too late. I mean, families don't find out about these things. People are private, or as you said, they were embarrassed, and so children often aren't finding out about it until things are already done.
Well, power of attorney can be a tricky thing too, because the parents can get suspicious. Oh, you just want my money, or you want to sell my house. So do you recommend that they bring in a third party, either an estate planner or a financial planner, or just an attorney just to kind of manage the whole thing?
Well, I'm coming at it from two angles. I mean, I'm often meeting with the parents. Sometimes it's the children who have initiated the conversation, but I think having a durable power of attorney is critical. But as you said, you have to be very careful. The document itself is one thing, but the more important question is who's the appropriate person to appoint. You're giving someone a great deal of access to your assets, and it often can be a very powerful tool and it's well used, but you need to make sure that you trust that person completely and that they're an appropriate person to serve in that role. But I think part of it is really initiating this conversation. And, you know, I know that Ellen Goodman has been on. You've talked about the Conversation Project, and I think we need one that's really focused on finances and how do you initiate that conversation with your parents, because there's so much more you can do if you really start things out before there's a real problem.
Now, Elizabeth, do you have siblings?
I don't.
Okay, because that is another complicating issue. Am I right, Stephen?
Absolutely.
It's like suddenly one person wants to go one way, the other wants to go the other way. One person thinks they should be the executor and, you know, make all the decisions.
Well, you see families playing out all the roles. I mean, it goes back to when, you know, one kid was 10 and the other 14, and you were mom's favorite. Or, you know, so that adds to it. You can have different opinions as to what's the right level of care. One child might be more focused on respecting mom and dad's privacy. The other is really focused on safety, and it just can make it a lot more complicated. Although, on the other hand, in being an only child, that's a whole other burden. It's all on you. You don't have anyone to share this with.
Now, Elizabeth, does she live with you now, or do you have her in a...
I moved to Buffalo and bought that was another thing. She had sold our family home and never bought another house for 25 years. So I bought a house, and now we live in the 2 apartments, but she's going into a nursing home soon, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we've been getting a lot of feedback on this series. You're not alone, as you might imagine. And here's one that we got from Nina. She said, we started to bicker and have arguments. I needed to understand that it was difficult for her to take orders, and she needed to know that the role reversal was difficult for me as well. Now, Steve, that's a discussion you must have had more than once.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of parenting your parents is not an easy conversation. And how do you begin that? How do you understand when to even intervene? I mean, your parent might have appointed you as power of attorney, but you're really not going to be getting involved with their finances until they need that. And if you start to see a decline, you know, when to insert yourself in that conversation is not always so obvious.
Did you have to have the car discussion? Was she driving?
Well, luckily she was sort of a little bit so far gone that I just was able to, like, sort of gradually take it from her, and she didn't really notice it too much. But even now, almost 3 years later, she still will say, I'm going to go get in my car and go to church, you know, or something. And she just doesn't know that it's not there.
All right, well, we're going to be posting these tips on our website all week and continuing the series, You're Not Alone. Stephen Cohen and Elizabeth GEHRMAN, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.